Hi, everybody. A very good evening from Muscat, Oman, and a morning, afternoon, wherever you are based. I am Shayon Day, and today I feel extremely excited, extremely happy to have Professor Michel and Frederick DeGraff with us. And it's such a pleasure to connect with Professor because obviously I can very happily say that we are an old connect. Since 2016, I have known Professor across platforms with his works. We have also interacted over different other occasions, and today it's an absolute pleasure to connect with Professor. And a very warm welcome to you into our platform.
Thank you, Prof. And it's really a pleasure to be talking to you today. And I remember exactly, Tony, that conference on language and decoloniality way back when. So it's good that we can continue these
Absolutely.
exchanges in this
Absolutely,
forum.
Prof. And just to let everybody know, so a very brief introduction of Professor DeGraff. He is from the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. He is the director, he is a professor of linguistics, he is the director of MIT Haiti Initiative. He is also the founding member of Academy Kreyol ISN. And Professor had been working, I mean, apart from being a researcher, a prolific researcher, prolific academician, it is also very essential to mention the kind of activist work that Professor DeGraff has been doing for quite some time now in terms of linguistics, decolonization in the field of creolization of languages, centered on his birthplace, Haiti, and also recently in the context of the Israel-Palestine war as well, and which has already uh, caused a huge uproar, obviously for wrong reasons. He being targeted at different points of time for extending his support towards the cause of Palestine. And today, I'm sure a lot of these perspectives will be coming to our conversation. To start off with a very basic question, I would say, Prof, to sort of feed us into your work. Um, I was considering that the consistent aggravation that we see in the racial, in the xenophobic, in the cultural, and the linguistic hatred, obviously across the world, where certain specific communities, because of their linguistic affiliations, because of their cultural affiliations, are targeted. As an experienced linguist, to what extent do you think that languages have a role to play in provoking and maintaining these sort of fractions?
Right, this is a great way to start, Prof. Sayan. And your question reminds me of it's a quote that I often use when discussing, for example, language in Haiti, because Haiti has all these issues that we've been battling now for centuries. And as a linguist, one of my foci has been looking at the role of language in, as you said, in maintaining fractions in society. And folks often ask me, so do you really believe that once you solve the language issue in Haiti, everything will be perfect? And it's an interesting question because there's a confusion there between what's necessary and what's sufficient. Of course, the language issue, if you solve it, it's not sufficient to solve all the issues, but it's a necessary condition, and that reminds me of this educator called Eckhard Hoof, who wrote about language and education. And he has this wonderful quote that language is not everything in education, but without language, everything is nothing. You see, and I like this notion of without language, everything is nothing. And this is not true for only education, right? It's true for, and you know it very well, Prof. Sayan, given your own work, that for most every sector in society where knowledge is being created, actually knowledge and power are created, without language, everything is nothing, because if you don't produce knowledge, if you don't encourage uh, the use of knowledge in local languages, in the languages that people speak, then that knowledge and the power that comes with it will only benefit a small sector, right? So going back to your question, that indeed language is a key factor in basically, evening the playing field to give everyone access to that knowledge and power that's being created. And actually, since you mentioned uh, Israel and Palestine, and I'm not sure I would call it a war between Israel and Palestine, because if you look at what's happening now, so who's being the people being killed is about a third, if not more, of children. But those children are not engaged in war against Israel. So calling it a war between Israel and Palestine, again, I think it's a kind of use of language that creates a particular view on a phenomenon that doesn't give reality its full weight. Because in this particular case, what we're dealing with is a genocide, right? It's not really a war where there is two parties that are in opposition, right? So in the case of what's happening in Gaza, it's a genocide. And then actually, and that takes me to I wrote this piece back in June 2024, and this piece was in reaction exactly to the ways in which institutions like my own MIT, even this Association of Linguists, actually it's probably the foremost association of linguists, called the Linguistic Society of America, the LSA, the ways in which they themselves have become complicit with creating a fog around this genocide, you see. And I wrote this piece called "When Language is a Weapon," and with the subtitle, "Social Scientists Should Resist the Distortions of Language that Are Misshaping Perceptions of the War on Gaza," you see. And basically, my argument is pretty straightforward, is that social scientists, in particular linguists, even though my own colleagues at MIT Linguistics have censored my views on this topic, it is also very telling, right? So my argument has been now for a few months that we have a special responsibility to resist and expose these distortions of language that shape perceptions. In this particular case, the perceptions of the genocide happening now in Gaza. You see, and in that piece, which because of time, I cannot go over all the details of it, but I recommend that the viewers look at it, because there I give several examples of the ways in which we use language to manipulate, even basic aspects of language, like using the passive voice versus the active voice, for example. And when we do that, and actually actually in the very seminar that was banned by MIT Linguistics, I had a scholar, Mary Jackson, who came to the seminar, and she shared with us an amazing study of thousands of New York Times articles. And what she showed there is the ways in which the New York Times, like other outlets, use the passive voice and other linguistic constructs to obscure responsibility for violence in Palestine, and also how they use metaphors and various other word choices to dehumanize Palestinians. And one of the actually, and I like to think of this is one particular construct that's being used, that you see now happening in the US Congress, in places like Harvard University, at NYU, for example. And I think of this as perhaps the most lethal weaponization of language in this context, which is this conflation that's now become almost official in various quarters of Zionism with Judaism, right? And that conflation is an extremely dangerous one, because what it does, it's so effective in silencing criticism of Israeli policies against Palestinians. In fact, that conflation between Zionism and Judaism, once you make it a crime to criticize Israel on the pretext that um, these critiques of Israel amount to anti-Semitism, then automatically you criminalize all Palestinians because Palestinians, by right, and it's a right that's recognized in the UN, for example, they have a right to resist occupation. That's a right that everyone has, right? As my ancestors in Haiti, when they were enslaved back in the 17th century, they had the right to resist French colonization. So the violence against that system was part of the right to resist. So then the conflation between Zionism and Judaism automatically makes all Palestinians criminals because by right they have to be anti-Zionist, right? So what this piece does as well is to silence, is to criticize the silences of various academic institutions, including MIT, my own institution, including the Linguistic Society of America, the LSA, including the Science and Human Rights Coalition of the American Association for the Advancement of Sciences, for failing, to address these linguistic distortions. You see, and basically this is not news. In fact, there was a very extensive report by Palestine Legal called the Palestine Exception, the Palestine exception. And what they did was to lay out an entire analysis showing that how, the press, higher education, various authorities, how they participate in violating the rights of Palestinians, very often through these manipulations of language, right? And that's the reason why I resigned both from the executive committee of the LSA back in March of 24, and also resigned from that human rights coalition at the AAAS, Association for the Advancement of Science in the US, right? So basically, so the question is just actually it allows us to look at the tip of this iceberg. It's a vast iceberg where indeed language plays such a key role in creating and maintaining these fractions, and also, and to put it bluntly, to maintain hegemony. And when we're now in the US, we've entered such a clear phase of rising fascism, right? It's clear now. There is no pretense of the fact that we in the US we've now entered a phase of fascism in our history, right? Where the new president is clearly taking over all kinds of powers that the law doesn't give to him. And I think now we have to be extremely clear about the role of language in supporting this sort of fascism. So yeah, there's a lot more to say, but just as a starter, I think, thank you for your question. I think it gives us basically a lay of the land that we should be
No,
looking at.
absolutely, Prof. I think when you were talking about the politics of language, language being censored, language used as a weapon of censoring other forms of languages, it was also just crossing across my mind, and in fact, about which you have also written in some of your articles. In fact, while I speak to you, I wish to share this article right in our chat box as well, where our other listeners can access. It's about how the word intifada have been misconstrued by the US, which basically in Arabic means resistance. Resistance in every form. It can be peaceful, it can be violent, depending on the context. But it has been very deliberately misrepresented as as something which is very anti as a form of anti-Semitism, as a violence against the Jews. And this is not again new. I mean, if we look generally at the history of colonization and where language, the colonization of languages played an essential role in the process, we see that it has always been happening. And also, I remember in one of your, I think a couple of years back, you delivered TEDx talk And where at the beginning of your TEDx talk, you start off with your personal experience that as a child, because you were speaking your language, how you were traumatized, how you were penalized. And the whole sort of racist discourse that if you are not speaking the European language, then you are not civilized, you are a gorilla. The sort of tagging the narrative of uncivilization, labeling you as very directly as uncivilized if you're speaking your own language. I think we cannot really ignore these histories when we are talking about these present crisis and present scenario. They're somewhere somewhat all align with each other. And in this respect, because obviously Creole languages in that case serve as a major point of one of the major point of resistances in your narratives, in your discourses. So I was wondering, like, what role do you think that Creole languages can play in countering the different fractions that you have already highlighted in your previous response?
Yeah, thank you for making that transition to something which is very close to me personally, the issue of Creole languages. And thank you for reminding me of this TEDx talk, which, in a way, what I did in that TEDx talk is to give a visual complement to this piece that I published in the New York Times about how I was taught to hate my language and myself. And the vignette that you just shared with us is a painful one. The one. So this is the fact that children in Haitian schools, when they are caught, I would love to use the past tense, when they were caught, but I think it's still happening, unfortunately. So when I was a child, especially when kids were caught speaking Creole, which is the national language, that's the one that everyone speaks, they were punished. And the punishment was sometimes physical. So I was, for example, beaten with a ruler for speaking Creole and given to write lines, something like 100 lines. I will never speak Creole again, but I have to speak French. And then you mentioned we call it symbol in Haiti, symbol, which means symbol. And the symbol was you had to wear the foot of a gorilla, to basically to say that, when you speak Creole, you are a gorilla, you're not human. It's worse than being civilized. You totally dehumanized, right? If you're a gorilla, you're no longer human because of speaking your national language, which is quite, in terms of think of the psychology of it, it's really horrible. But the fact is that today in Haiti, although since 1987, Creole has been made officially the one national language, which is true, that's the one that everyone speaks. But today still, most laws, most decrees, most written press, most textbooks, most exams, official exams are written in French, which the vast majority in Haiti does not speak, right? But talking about something which you're an expert in, Prof. Sayan, is the fact that even when the laws change, even when the laws make Creole official, and not only official, actually co-official with French, but it makes it the national language. But in spite of that, there is something which has been seared in the Haitian mind, seared, which is the fact that, without French in Haiti, you're a lesser human. And I like to borrow this metaphor from Toni Morrison. So Toni Morrison, she wrote this short, amazing book called The Bluest Eye, about how in America, in Black America, Black children, they think that they need blue eyes, they need white skin to be beautiful, to be human. And so I like to think of that metaphor in the context of Haiti, because in Haiti, what we have is a linguistic bluest eye. The idea is that to be beautiful, to be elegant, actually, the notion of being elegant is one that echoes an ad made by the Haitian member of the French Academy. His name is Daniel Laferrière. He made a video spot saying that when I speak French, I feel elegant. And this is a Haitian, which implies that when he speaks Creole, he's not elegant. When he's doing it, to serve the goal of the Académie Française, of the French Academy, although he's Haitian. You see, so this summarizes the fact that this use of language in Haiti is such a clear reflex of of hegemony, of what Stephen Biko once said, the South African freedom fighter. He says that the best tool of the oppressor is the mind of the oppressed. And that's exactly what we see. So when then Lafayette tells you that it's French that makes them elegant. When I remember actually, I'll never forget this experience that I had in Haiti, where this grown woman, very able woman, actually powerful woman, she had to take a son to hospital, and then she asked me to please go with her. And then she told me, and I was teaching actually in Haiti at that time, and I said, well, I would have to leave my classroom to go with you. He said that you need to, because my son is sick, and if I go alone with him without you, I don't speak French, and I won't get the help I need for my child. And she said that, without French, she said in Creole, "Moi pas moun," which means literally, I am not human. Moi pas moun. You see, and this is not just her. It's just you have many Haitians in this context, when they need service, they know that if they go to the bank, to hospital, and if they speak Creole, they will not get as good service as if they could speak French. That's why she wanted me to go with her. You see, but at the same time, if you look at proverbs in the language, we also know that Creole speakers know that this use of French is for power, right? You see, because you have proverbs that say things like, parler français, parler dit l'esprit, which means to speak French doesn't mean that you're intelligent. There's one that says, Creole, c'est langue racine, français, c'est langue achetée, meaning Creole is our root language, our real national language, and French is a language we have to buy. Actually, that proverb is a very powerful way to tell us that Haitians understand the material gains that you get through French, although they also know that, in terms of our souls, our identity, really Creole is it. But yet, the society creates a structure where French has more capital that we need to buy in order to make it a society. And then one of my favorite proverbs, if someone is speaking French, you can say, "Suspend parler français." But when you say to that person, "Suspend parler français," it means stop speaking French. It really means stop the bullshit. If you want to be sincere, if you want to be honest, speak Creole to me. You see, so speaking French becomes equivalent to bullshit. You see, so but what I think, what I'm trying to say is that, so what you see in Haiti is what you also see in many other communities in the Caribbean, in Hawaii, in other places where local languages are being stigmatized, is the fact that language has become a weapon for dehumanization, for creating caste. You see, in fact, I'm glad that we're talking about this with you, Prof. Sayan, who has so much expertise in the Indian subcontinent. So in fact, I remember you sent me that paper about higher education in India and the use of education there to maintain social structure where there's very powerful folks on top who don't care about education. They use education as a means to enrich themselves. And this actually, then I've been thinking about the caste system, because what you see in Haiti is that, in fact, that reminds me of this important book by Isabel Wilkerson about caste. It's called Caste, The Origin of Our Discontents. And then there was a movie made from that book by Eva DuVernay called Origin. Again, taking the making of that book and turning it into a movie. And there's a metaphor that's used both in the book and in the movie about caste being like the skeleton that creates gradation. And then on top of that skeleton, you have various skins. So in the case of India, it's Hinduism, or what my friend Bhumika Saraswati called it, she refers to Hinduism as Brahminism. The idea is that Hinduism imposes a structure of segregation where the Brahmins on top derives all the benefits in terms of resources, and then the untouchables, the Dalits, are basically at the bottom of the pit, right? But what you see in India, what's been happening there for thousands of years, you see it elsewhere. You see it in Haiti, you see it in the US, you see it in South Africa, you see it in Afghanistan, but in these other cases, the skin on that skeleton of caste is made of religion, of race, of language, and of gender, right? So in the case of Haiti, now to go back to your question, that's why the Creole language there and the Creole language of Hawaii, of Jamaica, of Barbados, of Mauritius, of Seychelles, of Australia, they're all necessary in order to break down this system of caste that's being used to reserve resources for a small group at the top, whether they are Brahmins, whether they are French speakers, they are white people. You need to break down that system, and language is going to play a major role. In the case of Haiti, it's the use of Creole for education, for lawmaking, for the press, for businesses, in order to break down this caste system, you see. So in the case of India, maybe you can tell me more about it. Language also has to play a role. In this case, it's a Haitian Creole, but one can think of the languages of the Dalits, the languages of the folks who don't speak Hindu. And we know now that we have this fascist movement by Modi trying to promote Hinduism as basically is the equivalent of Zionism, white supremacy, of in Haiti what you see with the use of French. You see, so in all these contexts, you see society creating these tools for segregation. You see, and once we understand the makeup of these various caste systems, then we know that language, among other tools, has to play a major role in breaking down these caste systems. So in fact, I would be curious to hear from you about your own work. I know that you've done lots of work in terms of new ways to create colonial structures, and I'm sure that you've thought more about this issue of caste in the context of India.
Absolutely, absolutely, Professor DeGraff, because when you were speaking especially about the question of the castification of the language, how caste and race has played an essential role. In fact, I would also add the aspect of race as well. And especially when we come into the Indian perspective or even the Indian subcontinental perspective, often see that it's very difficult to make a clear-cut distinction between the caste dynamics of language and the racial dynamics of language, especially where you very rightly mentioned in terms of the metaphor of the skeleton, that how if we look at the caste segregation in India, the practice of caste segregation in India, the segregational processes were obviously very well motivated by the question of language as well, because we have to understand that, especially what you mentioned about the recent politics of language and languaging as we see in contemporary right-wing India with respect to the Hindi language, is a very casteist stance, is very much a racist stance, because although it is being projected as the language, Hindi as the language of the Hindus in a very blunt and improper way, it's actually not the language of the Hindus, because within the Hindu community and the sub-communities, there are many other forms of very many other kinds of languages that are spoken. All of those languages have their own set of histories and cultures and evolutionary linguistic semantical perspectives, which have been very strategically killed to a certain extent just to promote these sort of extremely xenophobic sort of political approaches, which you very well equated with, which can be obviously in different contexts, can be equated with what is happening in Palestine, what has once happened in Haiti, what has happened in Germany, or what has happened in and is happening in other parts of the world as well, what is happening in Afghanistan. And we cannot really overlook or ignore the subtle connections that we can actually draw. And in fact, this also was making me think when we were talking about how certain languages, in the name of its appeal, in the name of materialism, in the name of marketization, in the name of politics, in the name of purity, in the name of culture, have been systemically erased. Educational institutions have also historically played an essential role in sponsoring and incentivizing these erasures. I mean, the recent articles that I've been writing on the question of problematic pedagogies in the with regards to the question of problematic curricular and other forms of management that we see in the universities are very much rooted in these pedagogies of erasures, in these sort of structures that are underfed with ideas of erasures rather than coming together, rather than interacting together, rather than being free to express our own opinions. They're all centered on the narratives of surveillances and censorships, which obviously you have been encountering back in your university. I have encountered at different points of time and still encountering on a lot of occasions, which have also triggered me to sort of leave India and try to go to a different country to avoid the, sort of the fiery eye of the presently ruling government, right? And this was actually, kind of provoking me to also ask you, and I already know that you have touched upon the question of Palestine a bit in the very first response, but just further continue with that because I mean, your support for Palestine, for which you have faced backlashes on the social media and even in your own university. And in spite of that, you have been very, bold enough to issue statements and responses and have been organizing creative activisms to keep pushing the causes. Now, as we have already talked about, that these surveillances and censorships are not new and they vastly draw from the colonial framework. So, I mean, my question to you is that why do you think that the neoliberal political and academic institutions are always feeling so threatened about
Mm.
these radical initiatives and recycling similar censorship mechanisms that once existed in the colonial times, especially if they think that they are so superior, they are so capable, why they should be bothered about us? Why they should think that we are problem creators?
Yeah, well, this is that's a great question. That's a great question. Why that fear? And also why that fear even among, say, linguists? And your question, actually, I'm just thinking of it now, brings up actually a cruel irony in my particular case, right? Because in my particular case, I am in the department of MIT linguistics that was made so famous by no less than Noam Chomsky. And if we think of the history of Noam Chomsky, for the past 5, 6 decades, he hasn't, in fact, I'll be honest that the reason why I was so happy back in 1996 to move from Ann Arbor, Michigan to Massachusetts to be at MIT is the thought that I would be Noam Chomsky's colleague, someone who he spoke so powerfully about, say, injustices in Haiti. He so well understood the role that the US and France have played in undermining Haiti's sovereignty for centuries. Yeah, I remember actually reading, he wrote this chapter called 1492. And he wrote this chapter for the 500 anniversary of Columbus's arrival to what was called, in quotes, I must stress the quotes, the New World, because of course it was not a new world, it was only a new world for Columbus, who got lost there, who called who called the Caribbean the West Indies, and he called us West Indians. And the fact that it's actually like in fact it's quite ironic that you and I now we're having this conversation about Columbus calling the Caribbean the West Indies, because I'm West Indian and you are East Indian. And to think that that mistake, that arrogant mistake became codified through language, that today geographically that area in the Americas is called the West Indies, which was basically a mistake, is quite striking, isn't it, Prof. Sayan? But yet it shows us again the power of language in creating distorted scenarios, even scientific ones, in this case, geography. And he called us Indians. He called the Tainos Indians. Obviously, they were not connected to your own genealogy as an East, quote unquote East Indian. Um, but yes, it's a cruel irony that I'm dealing with this repression at MIT linguistics, and so to give some background, and I think that background will allow us to understand what might be a good answer to your question about, why that fear, because that fear is not at all accidental. If you look at the history of fascism, for example, let's look at the history of fascism in Germany. You mentioned Germany earlier, right? So, um, in fact, last year, I was invited by MIT's Black students. They have a Black Students Union, and they asked me to give a talk. They were having a march for Martin Luther King, and they asked me to give a talk about the current situation at MIT, the repression against students, not faculty, students were protesting against genocide, and these students were being, penalized big time. Some of them, being put in jail by police for protesting against genocide. And that reminded me of the history of fascism in Germany. So there was a group um, back in 1942 called the White Rose. And the White Rose was a group of students, and with only just one lone faculty, a philosopher. It's actually quite, it's quite striking. And it's almost like the present, repeating the past. And those students, they were prosecuted, they were hanged, they were in the 20s, early 20s by the Nazis. Why? Because they were writing pamphlets. They were, posting flyers, revealing the opposition to the genocide of the Jews. And they were Christian Germans. But why were they such a target? Why that fear back in 1942 against students? Because, knowledge is power. Because if you want, in fact, there's a book by Jason Stanley about erasing history as a core component of fascism. You cannot have fascism together with a liberal education. You see, now what's really scary is how higher education would itself engage in its own annihilation, would engage in what you call erasures and censorships that go against the very mission of higher education. You see, that's the part that, because although in the case of Germany too, there were deans and presidents of universities who became complicit with the Nazis, you see. And again, it shows you that higher education might be a misnomer, right? It's an institution that's also engaged in complicity with power. But in the case now, let's go back to MIT, because I think I have to give you some background, to really detail the nature of that fear and the nature of the hypocrisy around that fear. Because, and I just go by some landmarks. So and again, just yesterday, the same group of students, the Black students who had invited me last year to speak about Martin Luther King, just invited me yesterday um, to speak about, again, Martin Luther King. And then what I had to do is to go back to history, look at the fact that, in 2015, MIT awarded me this award for leadership, for contributing to the ideas of Martin Luther King. And that award was because of the work that you described earlier, the work with MIT Haiti to promote the use of Kreyol and to unveil the use of language for hegemony. So I got an award from MIT for my work as a linguist activist. That was the award in 2015. Now, in 2022, I got the highest award in the field of linguistics. Is the award given by the Linguistic Society of America, the LSA. And that award was again, for the same sort of work that I've been doing as a linguist activist. And then in October 2022, my own department head, when I got this award, it was interviewed by MIT News, and I have to find, the exact the exact quotation to read for you. I'm looking for it now because, again, and I'm doing that to show you the how flagrant the contradictions are. That then, is going to tell you about the level of fear when it comes to scholarship around the use of language for fascism, right? Because what my uh, what my department head back then wrote or responded to the MIT News is that this is verbatim. So he said to MIT News, in quote, "It is good to see a professional organization like the Linguistic Society of America promoting scientists, not just for their research, but also for the kind of activism that might accompany it, battling prevalent misconceptions about the nature of the world, identifying the detrimental consequences, and fighting for change. Michel has been involved in all these activities, mostly through the MIT Haiti initiative, which he was instrumental in establishing. We are all very proud, right? So now this was October 2022. Now, when it comes to fall 23, just 1 year after, when I proposed a seminar on that very topic, right? Let me read for you what he wrote. Battling prevalent misconceptions about the nature of the world, identifying the detrimental consequences, and fighting for change. Now, that was October 2022. In fall 2023, I proposed a course to do exactly that, except that in this case, I was going to compare such use of language in Haiti and similar uses of language in the context of what's happening today in Palestine and Israel, right? In order to, quote unquote, research and do activism for battling prevalent misconceptions about the nature of the world, identifying the detrimental consequences, and fighting for change, right? And when I proposed that, I was and I was accused of lacking, quote, expertise to do that. The same thing that I was congratulated for um, in the context of Haiti, the Caribbean, Black America. Now, when it came to Israel and Palestine, I was declared persona non grata for daring to propose a similar study in the context of Palestine and Israel. And this actually should be shocking because the very goal of higher education and of proposing seminars is to advance knowledge. Actually, the term advanced knowledge, in quote, is what you'll find in MIT's own mission. We want to create context where we create knowledge. And if you look at seminars that are offered every year in my department, they often put in the description that the goal is to create expertise where there isn't enough, right? And I could quote to you many course descriptions from my colleagues where they actually say that we don't know enough about this topic. We're doing this seminar because we want to create new expertise. But in this particular case of my own course proposal, I was denied that fundamental right, to create new expertise in this particular adjacent area to my research for the past couple of decades. Now, it's interesting that in a way, as they now we can go back to the issue of why they were so fearful, which I'll go back to. But in bending this course in MIT linguistics, what they allowed me to do is to actually create what I call the people seminar, which was a non-course, but that actually attracted probably a larger number of participants, not only students, but also staff, the faculty, including faculty in philosophy in my own department, which otherwise might not have been as interested. But the fact that they bent the course created even more interest in the course. And the course was recorded by MIT OpenCourseware, whose YouTube channel has more than 5.6 million subscribers, right? Which in a way it's kind of ironic that by trying to repress my speech, now has given my speech even more exposure, you see? But we still have to try to understand what you asked, which is why such a fear that not only violates my academic freedom, but but clearly shows the contradictions in my colleagues' own practices when it comes to language and education, right? So why that fear, right? And I think, what I'm going to do now is to, you know, if your question allows me to go into the basic details of the seminar, because it's only interestingly, it's only as I was doing this seminar, it's only as I was listening to the guest speakers who I invited. In fact, my colleagues were also in opposition to guest speakers. They call it outsourcing. You know, you outsourcing your teaching to guest speakers. When in fact, guest speakers have been a regular staple of my teaching, and not just my teaching, but the department's teaching. There's a course, for example, on fieldwork. That course, we regularly invite the speaker of a what's called an unfamiliar language as a consultant. So in this case, it's clear outsourcing. It's a clear case where the faculty in linguistics don't have the expertise in that language, and they have to rely on a consultant. And that's clear outsourcing. In my case, what I do is to invite guest speakers who can contribute insider's knowledge on a particular topic. And that's what I've been doing now for decades at linguistics without ever raising a flag. But while doing this course, Prof. Sayan, that's when I understood why the fear. And because, let me give you one example that clearly showed why that course created such fear. Because I had one guest speaker who came from Hebrew University. Her name is Professor Nurit Peled Elhanan. And her work is on a concept that she calls, that's her term that she uses from Richard Dawkins, who wrote the book, The Selfish Gene. So it's a term called mind infection. And it's like a computer virus that takes over a CPU, the processing unit. In this case, that mind infection is a virus that takes over someone's mind. It's a metaphor. It's a technical term. But she uses a technical term to help us understand something that you'll be interested in, the way textbooks and education work in Israel to sustain, well, let's use the term caste system, something that you'll be familiar with. Let's put it in quotes. But this mind infection in the textbook socialized Israeli children into believing that they are grids of humanity where Western European Jews are on top, and then below that you have Eastern European Jews, below that you have Israeli Jews, meaning Jews from Iraq, from Arabic-speaking areas, and then you have Ethiopian Jews, Black Jews, and at the very bottom you have Palestinians who are seen as really lesser humans. And in fact, what she showed in the presentation in my seminar is the fact that these textbooks have children from the get-go believe that the massacres of Palestinians is good for the cause, that in order to keep a strong Zionist Israeli state that makes the Jews safe, those massacres are necessary. So children are taught, from the get-go to see the massacres of human beings, in this case Palestinians, as okay, right? And that was a powerful presentation. And after that, something happened in the seminar that I had never seen before in my 28 years of teaching at MIT, which is that there were some self-identified Zionist students who organized against me, who actually started putting stuff on social media that you probably saw to describe me as a rabid anti-Semite, who even attributed the concept mind infection to me, as if I were the one to have proposed it. When in fact, what I was doing in my social media is I was sharing the results of my seminar with the world and reporting on what was presented there by, in this case, an Israeli Jewish scholar. But I was accused of being anti-Semitic for sharing those slides from an Israeli Jewish scholar. And then the next week, I'm skipping details because of time, the next week in that seminar, the Daily Wire, which is a extreme right rag of a newspaper, filled of fake news, they sent a reporter to my seminar undercover passing as a student. And as she was in the seminar, she was tweeting lies about the seminar as I was teaching. And she identified herself as a student of the Middle East. You see, and then a couple of days after, a couple of weeks after, she wrote an article, which was a bunch of lies, which I deconstructed in a response on all social media. Now and then you have to ask yourself, why that fear? Well, it's because of exactly what Professor Nurit Pillay-Delanan described, right? Because once you understand the working of hegemony through education, through language, then you become stronger, you become more efficient in undermining this hierarchy, right? And that's lethal. That's dangerous, for a system that relies on indoctrination, that relies on what I call linguistic trumperies in maintaining itself. You see, so then I understood why my course created such fear, even among my linguists, among my colleague linguists, because my department head, back in November, just 1 month after the start of the genocide, he was upset with me. Why? Because I used the term genocide in the context of what was happening in Gaza. He would have preferred that I use the term ethnic cleansing. He was upset that I compared what was happening in Gaza with what had happened to Jews in Nazi Germany. He was upset that I was bringing up the Holocaust in the context of decrying the crimes in Gaza. And that's when he shouted at me that I'm out of my fucking mind. That's my colleague, my department head, cursing at me for doing something which was quite, I think, analytical, trying to understand, how can a people that have gone through such horrible, horrible crimes in the case of Nazi Germany, how can now they be doing to Palestinians what was done to them by the Nazis? And worse than that, using the same language. So Netanyahu has used the same language against Palestinians that the Nazis had used against the Jews. How can that be possible? You see, I was raising this question, and he got so upset that he cursed me out. You see, so basically, now I understand much better your question, right? Which is that fear is rooted in this innate desire to maintain your powerful position in society. Because once all the lies are demystified, then automatically the edifice crumbles. The edifice that creates these grades of humanity crumbles, you see, and that's why fascism cannot exist together with liberal education. You need to repress professors, you need to repress the truth in order to maintain a system of such vile domination based on caste, on having a whole sector of society viewed as untouchables, as what you in India call the Dalits, the untouchables, right? So it's the same thing over and over again, and only truth can set us free. But that truth is it creates fear, which I've seen firsthand now. So sorry, that's a very long answer to your question, but I thought that I had to give all these details for you all to appreciate the depth of that fear and where it's coming from.
No, absolutely. I think this was very essential, and I deeply appreciate, Professor, that you have given this whole background to us to understand where your perspectives are coming from. Yeah, I understand that we are actually kind of running out of time, but I can't really refrain from myself to share one final thought with each other before we conclude our conversation. Is to continue with the question of fear, to continue with the aspect of fear that you have so well fleshed out, especially with respect to your experiential context, is how to further, sort of overcome this fear. Is that we saw the whole frenziness of right-wing ideologies, the sort of infectious right-wing ideologies that are being fleshed out across the world. I mean, we see the policies, the frenzied policies of Trump, which often just completely mismatch with his own country's legal systems. We see the role played by people like extractive capitalists like Elon Musk in these process of systemizing these sort of hatred and genocides and the problematic narratives in the forefront. And it's not just based in the United States. I mean, we already talked about we can see this in India, we could see this in Brazil, we can see this in the across parts of Europe, in Australia, and different other parts of the world. And where more and more this fear gets generated, more and more they feel threatened, and more they are trying to build up these networking like global networks of exploitation, global networks of extraction. And I think in a lot of ways, probably in a lot of hard and harsh ways, I would say, but this also somewhere somewhat gives us the assurances that we are on the right track. Because the in fact, I would always say that the moment I see they have stopped being afraid of us, then I would hold myself somewhere accountable that we are failing to live up to their fear. So in that way, I mean, it's all of these unsettled experiences, all of these tensions that we're experiencing until all the sort of insecurities and the traumas and the crisis that we have to go through, somewhere somewhat we are building up in our own way our very radical and tangential pathways across the world, where we are creating more and more fears to make them feel more and more insecure. And I think all in all that we have talked and discussed today, Professor, this would be for sure a very strong takeaway for me, and I believe for all of us who have been here and attended the session, because no matter what, we have to, live up to this fear. We have to sort of keep creating this fear, and we have to keep on making them feel that no matter whatever you do to us, more and more you try to suppress us, more and more we would be louder to us against you. So I think I will just, end on that note, Professor. Maybe, I don't know if you have some final thoughts to share.
Thank you. I think you ended you so eloquently. I very much like the words that you just said, and I think it's true. In fact, that reminds me of a conference we had recently. I won't give too many details because and then it was actually there were two events that happened recently, which actually, now thinking about what you said, it makes me wonder whether these events were successful or not. Because one of with historians, Ilan Pape, is a Israeli Jewish historian who so well, I mean, he wrote this book that I recommend to anyone who cares about the truth about Palestine and Israel. It's a book called, in fact, I have it right here. I'll show it to you. It's called 10 Myths About Israel, right? And that book is so powerful because it really looks at all the basic truths, quote unquote truth, that we think we know about the region that I grew up with. So when I was a child, I really believed that Israel was a miracle country. It's one that we all should emulate, and that's the myth I grew up with. And it does such an amazing job, Ilan Pape, first of all, to help us understand the root of these myths, but also how that they are lies, they are blatant lies. Um, and 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 he gave a talk at MIT, and the talk was so well attended. There were hundreds of people, you see. But unlike previous events where, like my class, for example, my seminar, you know, they banned it. My own colleagues banned the seminar, and then while the seminar was ongoing, they sent undercover disruptors, Zionist disruptors, to try um, to derail it. Um, and I'm so much less known than someone like Ilan Pape. And for Ilan Pape to come and give an amazing talk where he was actually predicting the end of Zionism, he was looking at all these patterns in history, and his claim was that, this cannot go on. This is going to end, you see? And there was not one heckler, . So, now, given your question, Does that mean that he's no longer feared? But maybe not. Maybe what's happening is that, maybe the movement has made progress where in certain quarters, including MIT, where before certain kind of speeches or actually are still being repressed, but yet there is more acceptance that, we, we cannot live with these lies about what's happening in Gaza, what's happening in Palestine. So that gave me hope. There was also a conference of the same nature about rebuilding Gaza. And we were getting ready to counter protesters, hecklers. And there was not one heckler. It was a 2-day conference. So maybe we should wonder whether we're being successful, but at the same time, maybe we should think that we are creating change, that this movement for liberation for all, not just for Palestinians, but also for Israelis. How can you live in a state where you rely on the dehumanization of half of your population? How can that go on? That cannot go on. So maybe that's good news. And maybe as one of the end, maybe I will, again, remember what the students at MIT and elsewhere have done, at Columbia, in California, right around me, the students at MIT. What they've done is something remarkable, and the movement brings together so many different, you started with a point about fractions, the fact that language creates all these divisions in society. But what the students have done is showing that you can create solidarity. You can have a movement that's based on alliances for our collective liberation. You see, that's a term that's used by a group of Jewish students who are very courageous, although they keep being erased by the administration. In fact, that's a topic that a student of mine have written about. So Ali Hussein, who took my course and who actually got credit, he petitioned to take the course for credits, like 4 other students. She wrote a paper on rising fascism among MIT administration folks. And so those Jewish students, what they're pulling, like other organizations like the MIT Coalition Against Apartheid, MIT Coalition for Palestine, what they're asking for is solidarity for us all together to fight against this rising fascism. And maybe the quote for the end is the notion that I learned from a dear colleague, also very courageous, who's been repressed by her own institution. Her name is Anna Feder. She told me about this title of a book, and the title is actually written by these 2 organizers from this group called Jewish Voices for Peace. And they have a beautiful book, and the title is very evocative, and I'll leave it for the word of the end, is that solidarity is the political version of love. Solidarity is the political version of love. And I think this is what we need, solidarity that can give us courage to speak up and be fearless and refuse to be silenced. And in my own case, I owe a lot to MIT students who've shown me the path to that kind of solidarity that has helped me become fearless, and that I hope will help all the faculty, all the staff, and everyone else to be fearless and speak truth to power. So thank you, Cyan, for giving me this forum to share what I've learned from the students and from other staff and faculty. Too few so far, but yet they are working hard to tell the truth to power.